Everybody, welcome to another installment of Show to Be with Mike G, the show of life, the show of academia, Brexit, London, The Clash. That's right, The Clash. We talk a lot of music in today's chat with the director of whiskey outreach at Diageo, Dr. Nicholas Morgan. Here's one bit, here's a little update. He said he didn't see The Clash when we were chatting, but once we spoke again, he did in fact see The Clash. So if you needed yet another reason to find Dr. Nick all that more charming and exciting and interesting, there you go. Here's the one bit, though, I think is really important about this chat. Yes, we talk whiskey. Yes, we talk Diageo. There's some great bits of historical facts here that I didn't even realize about the whiskey industry in the UK. But there's an interesting and alarming parallel between what had happened at the time with the Brexit issue, with Trump just taking office. And I think we're seeing more and more of that futility. We're seeing more and more of that conflict, the misogyny, the isolationism. It's very interesting, and it's really great to get some insight from Dr. Nick on the subject itself. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy this excellent chat with Dr. Nicholas Morgan.
Well, spending some time here. Not entirely random, Mike. I mean, actually, my daughter's in the music industry.
Is she really?
So she has been across to Austin for South by Southwest, frequently, and has talked very highly of the city. Yeah. And I know some other friends in the music business who've.
What does she do, mind you?
She's well, she does two things, really. She is creative director for publishing at Beggar's Music, who, the biggest independent in the UK. In fact, probably biggest independent full stop. And then as a sort of side project, which has probably got a bit bigger than she anticipated, she manages a band called Glass Animals, who have been doing really well here.
I'm very familiar with them. Yeah, that's a brilliant band.
Yeah.
So, that's great.
Yeah, no, it's a huge achievement. And I've learned, as I watched her career with admiration, that it's tough being a woman in the music business. It really
Absolutely.
is. So I've got huge respect for what she's achieved.
And regrettably, I mean, I think this is really an apt time to maybe dive into this a little bit. This week's been really tough for us in the States.
Yes.
Are you getting any of that? Like, just come in?
Well, that would be an understatement. But remember, we had a very tough week in July.
Great point, yes.
And just so that you know, it's not going to make you feel any better. We are a long way from being out of that situation.
It takes a long time. Because will it be years, you think, before the Brexit piece kind of starts to resolve? If it does?
Well, the formal exit process takes 2 years. So that's at least as long as it will be. But just the aftermath from the election, the two rival camps still seem to be as bitterly opposed as they were before it. And strangely, the winners seem more angry than the losers, which is rather odd.
Which is so strange. We're over here gloating, if you didn't know. Now, I'm not part of the winning group necessarily. No one in Austin is, frankly. But, the states are rallying around Trump, which is, it's fine. And they are gloating so much. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand why necessarily. But this kind of division that we're experiencing now, you're saying you guys have experienced it. What does it stem from? I know there's socioeconomic things that probably could be causes, but why culture do you think that the country is split like that?
It's interesting, Mike, because the way I look at it, there are real similarities between what's happened here and what happened in the UK for the what's now called the Brexit vote.
That's not a bad term. Is that okay term to use?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what everyone calls it.
Good,
that's what it's become. And, it seems, you'll see it represented in this way in the media and newspapers, but it seems that there is a a large group of people who, certainly in the UK, I think, who felt they were not part of the mainstream political discourse.
Yeah.
They were not necessarily included in the minds of politicians, largely from areas which have suffered economically very badly over the past 20, 30, 35, 40 years.
Is it typically more rural areas?
No, these are former industrial areas.
I see. Okay.
Principally, there's some significant rural areas, but if you look at the big, heavy Brexit voting areas, I would imagine if you looked at them socially and economically, they wouldn't look particularly different from the areas that voted
Detroit.
for Mr. Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So, it's characterized as the sort of dispossessed fighting back, wanting to be heard.
Yeah.
I mean, with Brexit, I think it's one thing to fight back, but then you've got to figure out what you're going to do next, and we have no idea at the moment.
I think we don't either.
Yeah,
we wanted this change. Well, many of us, half of us, let's say, wanted this change. We didn't know exactly what it looked like. We blamed whoever we could for our own shortcomings, and that's the problem. And I don't think that never seemed to be the narrative with the Brexit piece for us, right? Like, when I think of misogyny and I think of prejudice and bigotry, that's not something that's really synonymous with the UK. The states have their own particular flavor of bigotry. We really do.
Yes, that's probably right. But clearly there were undertones of racism in the European vote in the UK, I think in some quarters. And certainly I think the thing that distressed a lot of people who wanted to stay in the EU was that the vote to leave sort of represented a really backward-looking sort of insularity, parochialism. We can do best by ourselves. Well, the fact of the matter is, in a global economy, you can't do the best.
Was it isolationism? Is that kind of
sort of? Yeah. Almost. Yeah.
Like somehow that you have this nationality or patriotism is what we called it for some time. That somehow we can survive on our own. We'll be just fine. One
of the things that people said that you heard quite a lot was, "We want our country back."
Yeah. Oh my God, are you kidding me?
We want
same sentiment back. Exactly.
Yeah.
We want America to be great again. I guess for some reason it became less than great. Well, didn't want to dive into it too much, but there is this parallel, and I think we're catching each other on a week where a lot of us feel very overwhelmed and downtrodden.
Seriously, Mike, the days and weeks immediately after the Brexit vote in the UK were very, very strange.
Yeah.
And coming here and talking with guys driving taxis and stuff like that, I get a sense that it's equally strange here. It's not weird like Austin is supposed to be. It's just sort of strange.
It's got this like weird. It's discordant.
Yeah.
The notes, the vibe is just not meshing right now.
Absolutely.
It's an interesting time, and I'm sure you're still going to find good food, good music. You talk about heading to Antone's tonight. I think it's going to be a great stay. But so, on the advice of your daughter, who's doing very well.
So, on the advice of my daughter and other friends, and just because the city does have this reputation, there's the music thing. Yeah. I'm a blues guy, and although Stevie Ray Vaughan is probably not actually one of my favorite artists, he just has such a presence, and all my guitar teachers absolutely worship him for his technical skills. Again, I mean, I'm not
large, heavy gauge strings, man.
Well, heavy gauge strings and this skanking style, which is almost unique, really.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's just you got to come to Austin, really.
Well, so I take you for a guitar player then.
As something of a guitar player.
Or how about an ex-guitar player?
No. I still play. In fact, I've played more over the past 5 or 10 years than I probably did the previous 20 years.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Let's. I think that's the perfect way to kind of see into your growing up, and you're from the UK, obviously.
From the UK.
Where did you grow up?
So I'm not sure how familiar people listening to this will be with the UK, but
we're so enlightened, actually, many of the listeners. Don't worry. Yeah.
I was born in Warwickshire. That's famous because it's where William Shakespeare comes from, Stratford-upon-Avon. So my father was a police officer, and as police officers do in the UK, we moved around different small towns in Warwickshire, and then he retired and moved to a town in Oxfordshire, and I moved there, which is where I sort of finished my schooling and then went off to university.
Were you playing, because music, I feel, it's got to be a thread to you, like an undercurrent that kind of influenced you, even early on as like a middle. We call it junior school or
Started playing the guitar when I was 13.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. Everyone wanted to play. Everyone wanted to play the guitar. Everyone wanted to be in a band, and I was certainly no different. And so I started then. We had a couple of bands. Sort of playing rock and roll stuff like old-fashioned rock and roll stuff.
What kind of stuff would you say at that point was like really, really influential to you?
Well, I think it's hard to say. I mean, at that point, you listened. You tended to listen to the music that your older, in my case, my older sister was listening to, and in the case of my friends, many of their older brothers were listening to.
Right.
So there was sort of 2 or 3 different strands. There was definitely a blues strand, old style country blues for the most part.
Blues.
Yeah.
So,
Mississippi John Hurt, those really melodic type of guys. So electric blues came along a bit later. That was a sort of discovery thing.
Yeah.
So there was that thread. Then there was English folk.
Tell me who would you say is the quintessential English folk artist?
Well, I suppose. Well, today.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean even back then.
So back then we were listening to people like John Remborn and Bert Jansch and people like that who were just wonderful, wonderful guitarists and singers, and they were sort of reinventing. Folky people talk about the tradition,
right?
So these guys were reinventing the tradition with huge technical skills and a lot of empathy for the songs, writing their own songs as well. People like Martin Carthy, Dave Swarbrick. When I lived in Oxfordshire, actually, we lived close to a village called Cropperdy.
Okay.
And Cropperdy was really famous because it was where, at the time, most of the band called Fairport Convention played, who were one of the first pioneer folk rock bands.
Interesting.
People like Richard Thompson, one of the best guitarists in the world ever. And people like Richard Thompson in the band. And they had a big festival there every year, which still goes on. It's sort of one of the big folk events in the UK music calendar. So there was a lot of that folk stuff.
Interesting, folk,
going on. And I still listen to a lot of that stuff, actually, that older stuff. And now modern folk music in the UK is on fire.
Yeah, I mean, so now who is kind of leading that? Because I'm trying to think about modern folk. There's people in the States, Father John Misty is kind of like that here.
Okay.
But I don't know, I think of...
So two quite different... sides of it. There is a vocal group called the Unthanks, who are sisters from the northeast of England, and they did that sort of blood harmony thing, which is quite it's almost unnatural. It's not, because it goes beyond harmony, to a very different place, and they have very dark, sort of brooding songs.
Very echoey and dreamy?
Yes. Yeah. So that's one thread that I personally
have to check that out. I'm not familiar. Yeah.
Like a lot. And then there's someone whose name I can't remember. Who I was going to say who's a great singer from Kent, guitar singer, so quite political. Which folk music should be. Should have a point of view and an attitude. And you've got a lot of stuff in between. But it's a big thing now, which is great, because I think there was a danger of it getting lost at some point.
It came kind of full circle. Yeah. Think about it. Now it took a departure. You've got new wave and all
that's right.
Buzzcocks and stuff, which I don't know why I go for the Buzzcocks first, but very, very great band. But yeah, I mean it all cycles.
Yeah.
And it really does. And the things that were once new are new again.
Buzzcocks. Yeah. I saw the Buzzcocks in 78.
Are you
in Manchester in a crazy festival? I'd been drinking, I remember, a lot of Boddington's beer, which was brewed in Manchester at the time in the old brewery, which doesn't exist anymore. And it was a hot day, it was one of those things, beer,
but that's
day.
Amazing. I'm sitting here very envious.
Just astonishing. And then I went to see them, because they're touring, and they were still two of the original band.
Yeah.
And went to see them about 4 or 5 years ago in London at Shepherd's Bush Empire. And it was great. I mean, I'm too old to stand up. I was in the balcony sitting down, but the guys downstairs were sort of pogoing and all that stuff. It was great. It was just quite
well. So, can I ask you? I'm going to ask you a couple other bands.
Yeah.
Influentials to the States, especially. Right? Do you ever see the Clash?
No, I did not. Sadly.
Did you ever see the Jam?
Yes.
How was Paul Weller?
Well, Paul Weller was great, and I've actually been lucky enough to see Paul Weller a number of occasions since then at different things. And he's someone that I've got a lot of admiration for.
He seems like a great guy.
He knows when he's doing good stuff, and it's that difficult thing. He knows when it's time to change and just say, "Okay, this is it."
Very
Sorry,
astute
guys.
in that way. Yes.
And in fact, I was talking to someone about David Bowie. Because man, if there was ever someone who knew when it was time to move on,
could feel the pitch in the world.
Brutally, it was him, and Weller, I think, is the same, and he's produced some great music.
He really has. Still quite good.
Yeah. It's still very good, and a really good guitarist that people often don't see that. They don't, because he's a man singing and he writes the songs and stuff. But he's a good guitarist.
He's just a great all around. I mean, he's somebody. There are a few. But he's a guy I'd like to get a drink with. That's the ultimate barometer, I
think. And I understand he likes to drink as well. So it would be a good choice all the way around. I think
that'd be a very apt choice. Yeah. Well, so you, as we all are at 13, we're playing guitar, we're forming bands, we want to do this thing. Yeah. Rock stardom is obviously on everybody's radar at that point. Were you much of a student then, at that point?
Yeah, I was. So and it's quite interesting, because I loved studying and I loved history in particular, which is what I went on to study at university. Mm-hmm. And I played, and I got into that thing that people do when you're 18 and 19, which is start to write songs. Yeah. I have a theory that writing songs is much easier for younger people than it is for older people.
It's got to be.
Yeah, it's got to be, hasn't it? So I had no fear at that point and did all of that stuff. And there was sort of a moment when I was at college, actually, at university, where there were a couple of guys who were sort of promoters and stuff. And they said, well, you could probably do this if you wanted to.
Really?
But it's hard. It's not easy. And at the time, I was just moving into taking my final exams, and I was thinking of doing research. So it was sort of, well, which way do I want to go? And I suppose being a bit fiat, as they would say in Scotland, so that is to say not having boldness about me.
Right.
I thought, no, well, I'll go the history way. And of course, no one had told me quite how hard it was doing history and researching, because it's a lonely, long, sort of thankless task, really. A bit like being a musician, I think.
That's right. But at least, at the end of the day, or like after the end of a couple of hard weeks of writing these songs and getting mates together to play these things, at least you kind of get to share it.
Yeah.
We think about history, it's very insular.
It is. It is.
You sit the long nights between you and the page.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is it suffice to say then you studied history? Was that kind of your specialty?
Yeah, I studied history, and actually I was... although I hadn't studied it at school, I had this idea that I was really, really interested in early medieval history. Which
what drew you to early medieval?
Well, I don't know really. I mean,
it's kind of dark stuff. People killing each other for stupid reasons.
Maybe it's a bit sort of Arthurian legend, and it's a bit less tangible than modern stuff, and obviously less well documented. But I went to university, and somehow my mind got changed, so I ended up studying sort of early modern, late early modern history and religious history as well.
Religious? Did you grow up religious?
No, my family. Church at Easter and church at Christmas. You know, that sort of family.
Because you got to.
You have to. Yeah.
You have to.
Well, and when my father, when he was a police officer, senior police officer has to show up in town at these events as well. Yeah. So there's that about it.
But you pursued it very heavily, even to the point where you said, well, "This is worth developing a dissertation for." And that's what they call it there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, PhD. Yeah, I mean it's a book really. It's a big piece of work, and I think there are two things really. There's the process of discovery, because history, being a historian, is all about finding stuff out, I suppose, put it very simply. And actually today, Mike, just so you know, I'm as driven by that desire as I was when I did this research all those years ago.
The undiscovered.
Yeah, and I think it's the undiscovered, the unknown, trying to figure out where the boundaries are between the unknown and the unknowable, which is quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
And also, I think trying to understand why it is that, frankly, this sounds very arrogant, so I apologize in advance.
You're much more accomplished of the two of us, so be as arrogant as you like.
That's very kind. Trying to figure out why it is that people often get this stuff so badly wrong. And
that's a great point.
If we get onto the area of whiskey history, then we might go into that. But, people make up stories, frankly, and there's a process which I have actually tracked in a couple of instances, just to find out, well, how did people come to believe that was true?
Right.
Did it actually
common knowledge
happen,
at some point, right? Yeah.
And certainly in the case of spirits, and my involvement in the spirits business later, there are at least two instances, both occasions, when I tracked it down to a piece of copy that a copywriter had written about 25 years earlier.
No kidding.
And somehow creative copy.
You just fabricated
became,
something.
Yeah, obviously it was creative copy, I wouldn't call it fabricated. If someone was asked to imagine something.
Creative copy, that's good, yeah.
But somehow over not too long a period, that becomes true. And the same happens in what you might call big history as well.
Yeah.
Things become true, and they're not. They're just imagined at some point.
That's amazing.
Hearsay becomes history. It's crazy.
Do you find it humorous? I mean, there's probably a lot of consequences from someone lying about history and recreating it.
Sometimes it can be humorous. I think there are other occasions when it is positively dangerous. So
dangerous, yeah.
Here's the thing. There is something that you might be aware of called sort of golden age theory.
Okay.
So we were talking about the recent elections in the UK, about staying or leaving in the European Union. And one of the sentiments that the people leaving articulate, who were for leaving, and of course were successful, articulated very clearly, was this idea of, we want our country back. There was an idea of something in the past that had existed that does not exist today. And they were sort of struggling to articulate what that was, but that was, a lot of the thinking was behind this sort of a mythological idea of the past. Now, in the world of whiskey, this is this
is good. No, we think it seems like it's a tangent, but this is a parallel.
In the world of whiskey, if you talk to a lot of, certainly in Scotch world, and I think also in Bourbon world, I know enough Bourbon people to know this is true. If you talk to a lot of really engaged, but without wishing to sound rude, not necessarily terribly well-informed enthusiasts about Bourbon and Scotch, they are deeply in this golden age theory.
Yeah.
There was a time when it was all better.
I see.
There was a time when it was all different. There was a time when it was so much simpler than it is today.
When it was great.
Yeah. And we all loved each other and blah, 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 blah.
When the fuck did that happen, right? Like, that's it. That, you're right. It is a pipe dream. And I think that going back to those moments where we'll use the standard make America great again, right? Which implies a couple things, right? And this could be the same thing for history, but it implies that, one, things aren't great, okay? Well, what if they are great? You're telling me they're not, but why? I think it's great, right? And then when was it great? Mm-hmm. And I love this. It's called the Golden Age.
Golden Age theory, and it dates back to the Renaissance, in fact, before the Renaissance, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
And so people...
There is a famous painting.
Which painting?
14th century painting, which is either called the Golden Age, or certainly, if you go to that thing called Google, which masquerades as research for many people.
Ooh, I love it.
Yeah, if you type in Golden Age, you'll come up with these paintings which capture this idea, even in the sort of late medieval period, that there was a time before when it was all better and less
halcyon days.
Halcyon days, that's the word. Yeah, absolutely.
But that's crazy. But you know what? That's it. People are living in the past that they fabricated and created that never truly existed.
Many, sorry, correct myself. Many pasts and histories are imagined.
Yeah.
Okay. I did a paper a couple of years ago at Tales of the Cocktails, which was actually called Scotch Whisky's Imagined Past. And it was all about the way that the big, particularly the big blending houses, so like Johnny Walker and Dewar's, Buchanan's, the way that they very artfully and cleverly created a history for Scotch whisky in the very late 19th and early 20th century. It's a new drink, right? Scotch doesn't have a real history. Yeah. But they used advertising with a precision that should frighten anyone in the advertising industry today to create this mythological past. And they did it with great effect. It's really so interesting, actually, to look at how they did that. And so that's just one example of an imagined history.
This is all coming to me now. Yeah. Instant history.
Yeah.
Wait, because you think about Bombay Sapphire, for example. Oh, it's been around for 200. Wait, I thought that this was a brand from the 80s.
I couldn't comment on Bombay Sapphire. That wouldn't be correct.
No, you can leave it up to me. But it is. It's interesting. It's like this brand's about 300 years old, right? No, it's a load of rubbish. Like but it's so shrewdly marketed, and the narrative is so finely tuned.
Yeah,
and that's scary.
Yeah.
It really is.
But it's not just brands that do that.
No, you're right.
As we've sort of suggested, it could be politicians, individuals. Sometimes even musicians, I think, create paths for themselves that aren't quite as they may have been.
They're personas. Just different facets of a persona. All right, so this we're building this back.
Sorry, it's going all over the place.
No, this is great, and I think it's very pertinent to talk about now, especially. We're all kind of sensitive right now. When we're talking about it, you can feel it. You can feel it in the air right now in the city like Austin, or if you go to San Francisco, things like that. But we've got a musician turns into a historian, studies it. You write about Quakers and your interest in religion and history in general. The Golden Age, which I think is a brilliant concept to really talk about. I gotta then ask, what is the bridge into the booze industry? Was it because you liked to drink? Was it because you liked the challenge of uncovering the things that were yet to be uncovered?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I wrote a PhD about Quakers. That doesn't get you a job, sadly.
That doesn't get you girls either, does it?
No. That would be true. And so I picked up a couple of research jobs, which I was very lucky to get. And they led me on a circuitous route to the University of Glasgow, which is a great academic institution in Scotland, obviously. Where I taught Scottish history ended up teaching Scottish history, about which I probably wasn't particularly well equipped at the beginning, but I made up ground.
How old are we talking?
I must have been about 27 or something.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So very bright gentleman.
Teaching, as an Englishman, I can tell you, teaching Scottish history to Scottish students in Glasgow was a gas. It was so entertaining.
Do they have a problem with it inherently? Just this dynamic, like you're not even from here.
No, I don't think. I've never really found any problems in Scotland. I've lived and worked in Scotland for a long, long time. Yeah. But it was a particular opportunity to be quite provocative to young, inquisitive minds, which was quite entertaining.
I knew that's where you're going. Yeah. Love it.
So I was teaching Scottish history, and actually I had been given a sabbatical, which is when you go off and research. Mm-hmm. It was a big collection of largely unread documents about the physical development of a part of Glasgow's West End, sort of very famous and beautiful part of the city. And the sort of doesn't really matter, but the property developer had gone catastrophically bankrupt.
Okay.
And the great thing about Scottish law is that when you go bankrupt, the whole process comes into play, which means that lots of documents are created and lots of documents are kept and retained.
Oh, interesting.
So you had a real insight into the whole sort of development process, the finance behind it, the architecture, and the fact that this guy who had been a developer was a bit crazy. I mean, he was a wonderful personality.
Eccentric.
Eccentric, yes. We might say. Yeah, apologies to any crazy people. I didn't know eccentric would be the word.
It's an adorning kind of.
Yeah,
it's a nice thing.
So I'd had my mind sort of stuck in this guy's head for 6 months, which is what history does to you. You get inside people's
method acting.
And I came back to my desk with sort of 6 months of correspondence. I have to add, people wrote letters in those days. So for anyone that doesn't get the idea of correspondence, so literally a pile of letters. And so going through them, and halfway through, there was a letter from a company called United Distillers, which I vaguely knew the name of.
Were you drinking even at this point?
Oh, yeah. I enjoyed, been a long time sort of devotee of gin, actually. So gin and tonics, one of my favorite drinks. And I drank whiskey a little bit. I had colleagues at the university who sort of mentored me in whiskey and stuff like that. Done a bit of academic work on whiskey as well, but not a lot. Led from this company saying, would I like to go and speak to them about starting up an archive?
Interesting.
Okay.
That's like the perfect gig.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, no, not really.
Well, maybe not perfect.
I mean, historians are not archivists. Historians like to have archives that they can go in and make an absolute mess of and all the rest of it. Archivists are very precise,
orderly,
clear thinking, orderly, and they're professionally trained people. I mean, it's a serious sort of...
So there's a fine distinction between being a historian and archivist.
Anyway, that was, as you say, that was interesting. It's like, okay, this is a bit different.
Yeah.
And I discussed it with my then wife. Said, what do you think? This could be interesting. And she was, really encouraged me and said, you need to go and talk to these people. You need to think about what you're going to say to them as well. So I sort of got quite serious about it and had a pitch for them, which was that what they really needed was a professional archivist. That's relatively easy to find.
Right.
But I was going to be the magic dust between the archive and sort of the business, which was what I felt they probably needed. So anyway, I went to speak to these guys, and they swallowed the magic dust, and I was offered the job the same day. And then a few weeks later, when I was still doing my academic job, was taken down to this huge bonded warehouse in Leith in Edinburgh, which was one of the old centres of the Scotch business in the 19th century. Leith's full of these old places. And at the time, it was attached to a quite strange place where United Distillers owned a company called Krabby's, John Krabby and Company. And they made green ginger wine, which you would probably call a speciality liqueur.
Oh, yeah.
Much loved in Scotland with whiskey. It's called Whiskey Mac. So you've got quite hot, spicy ginger wine and then a warming whiskey flavour behind it. Nice drink, actually. Yeah. So they made this ginger wine there. They had used natural ingredients and had steeps. So they brought in wine, I think, from Italy, and they steeped the different natural ingredients individually in these different steeps, and then mixed it together and bottled it. And they had an old whiskey business, which was why they had this bonded warehouse next to the winery, which was by and large. Actually, they also had gin stills, beautiful little gin stills. Yeah. Which I'm not sure what happened to those. They were beautiful things. And they had this empty bonded warehouse, and I was taken into this bonded warehouse, and the guy who was going to be my boss said, well, we want you to fill this up. It's like,
wait, all right. Whoa. What do you fill it with specifically? So are you filling it with research?
With historical records. So it's build an archive from scratch,
a piece of paper is quite thin.
Piece of paper's quite thin. So I employed a professional archivist, and we had a number of temporary staff. In fact, now it's a team of 6 professionals that look after this.
Amazing.
It's the biggest collection of historical records relating to alcohol beverages
all
in the
different
world.
Types of segments?
Yes, it's Scotch, gin. Irish cream liqueur,
ginger
it's
wine.
It's Diageo. You name it, it's in there somewhere.
What do you think? Because you think about the big guys, and you always think that they're concerned about money. Now, I know it wasn't Diageo at this point, but what was the objective for them then? So
you have to remember a bit of drinks history, I suppose. Diageo had been formed in 1987. From the rather traumatic merger between the Distillers Company and the Guinness Company.
Okay.
A company called Argyle Foods, who run by a man called James Gulliver, who was as the Distillers Company, who were quite snobby, liked to call him, was a grocer.
A grocer.
So he ran a very large multiple grocery chain, but nonetheless, he was a grocer. Had made a hostile takeover bid for the Distillers Company, which was, a massive business. So the Distillers Company had looked for what we call in the UK a white knight, so someone to come in and help them out of this situation. And that was Guinness, which at the time was run by a man called Ernest Saunders. They obviously had the Guinness beers. They also owned Bell's Scotch, so they had some distilleries, whiskey brand. And Guinness leapt at the idea, but it turned out to be not quite the white knights that the Distillers Company had anticipated.
Right.
And also it turned out that there'd been a pretty substantial fraudulent share support operation going on to enable Guinness to make the purchase. So there was a terrible sort of fallout from this. People went to prison, yada, yada, yada.
Wow, I didn't realize. Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't have heard much about it here.
Well, you probably maybe did at the time. I mean, it's a long time ago, but it's a story that people still remember in the UK for sure. And the story is important because what was happening is that the sort of culture and corporate memory of this whiskey business that had been going on since some of the threads of it, went back certainly to the 18th century, if not with companies like Hague Whiskey to the 17th century. Mm-hmm. And this was all sort of being lost. And when the Guinness guys came in, lots of plants had been closed and offices closed, and the physical artifacts of the past had been lost, had been sold, had been stolen. So it was really clever thinking, I think, on the part of a few people who said, we need to stop this. We need to stop this now because history is an important part of our culture and it's a critical part of our brands. Every Scotch whiskey brand in the world has got a date on the label somewhere.
Right.
And the date means something, and it means that at its sort of simplest, it means stories for marketing guys to play with.
It's good. It's
good fodder, stories to help people create new brands and do great design work. Label books and old advertising.
Right. So there is the twofold kind of element to it. There is an academic and then academic facet to it. Where it's like we need to know these things as part of heritage, tradition, history. But at the same time,
it works for the business. It works for the business.
Does.
When let me tell you, when a lawyer phones up and says, well, it's an interesting thing here because we have what I will refer to as brand X, which is a rather large brand of blended Scotch whisky with big sales in Latin America. And in one of our biggest markets, someone has challenged our right to use this trademark, which could be, let's say, rather embarrassing for us. So we need to understand where this trademark came from.
Yeah, the paper trail.
That is when your academic value has dollar signs
that's amazing.
All over
yes,
it.
You're absolutely right, yeah.
So this archive that we now have that I went to set up, and lots of people put lots of work into it since I moved on, is a functioning part of a hard-nosed business.
Yeah.
So it's there because it pays for itself to be there in a whole range of ways.
Yeah, that's I didn't even.
And Diageo has invested millions of pounds into it.
Yeah,
millions of pounds. And I have to say, I can only admire the thinking and the commitment that's gone into that.
Again, because it's got two great purposes. One of which that is rich and cultural. The other which is operational and kind of, as you said, to some point, making sure that your bases are covered as a business.
Yeah.
How long did this? I can't imagine how the multitude, or rather just the magnitude of information that you had in this warehouse. How long did it take you to quote unquote complete?
Fill it up.
To fill it up, yes.
Well, we had, I would say, a really wonderful 2 years out on the road in Scotland and in England as well, hunting stuff down. It was so exciting, actually. And, I remember visiting one of the distilleries that we owned, which actually Diageo doesn't own now, but one of the UD distilleries on Speyside, and it was run by a really nice guy. And he was very friendly, very approachable, and went to see him, showed around the distillery, any records here that you know of? Any,
what do you got? Yeah.
Yeah. He said, no, I don't know. No, nothing like that. And so I think that was the first visit. Second visit, just called in, because this thing was about building relationships. There was a lot of distrust in the company.
I see. Okay. So he's not. He probably not, but might not be as forthcoming.
Yeah,
the first
possibly.
time.
You know, and so you just put yourself in front of people as much as you could. So we went back, sat in his office. Trapdoor. Okay. Went back again, called in, and I think on the fourth visit I said, "Trapdoor, what's up there?" He went, "Oh, there's just some old stuff."
A globe.
So we got. This is Balmenic Distillery actually. So we got up there, and it was one of the best collections, most complete collections of records relating to any of the distilleries, because many distilleries stuff was just thrown out.
Right.
Particularly in the 1960s in the UK, people were not interested in the past. It was all about the future.
Yeah.
You know, new distilleries were being built, distilleries were being expanded, old buildings knocked down, lots of stuff was lost. But up in this attic, it was like heaven. You know, it was
That's amazing.
All there.
He didn't think about it. He's like, well, we can go up there and look if you want.
You know, and so that was the sort of things we had, you know, and eventually we accumulated a significant amount of material, and we tracked stuff down that had sort of got out of the company, and people were kind to give us things, and we bought stuff, you know, as you have to. So as I say, what those 2 years, and I mean, it's continued to grow since then, but it's now this huge resource, and it's a resource for the industry and for people to write about the industry, you know,
absolutely.
As well as just Diageo.
It's funny because I find this interesting parallel that perhaps it's the same. The pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of hard copies of records and things. Yeah. That you got a new venue every night. You're touring. You are a performance artist. If you think about it,
maybe
that's a pretty good lifestyle.
Yeah.
How'd the wife feel about it? You being gone all the time.
Well, that's my ex-wife. Sadly, although glad
I'm not laughing because of course
we have kids. Look, we have a great relationship. Good. We have a great relationship with my kids, so that's good. But it was probably a bit too much time on the road.
Yeah, it's that's how it goes, you know. But you're devoted to this thing that now seems to be this LexisNexis, as we call it, of just information. I can't even imagine. So you've got access to all this information, which means that you inherently now are probably going to understand distillation. You're going to understand all these facets of the business, whether it's malting.
Let me tell you one thing.
Okay.
I am not a scientist.
Good.
Okay?
Good. Either am I. Yeah.
I really wish I understood distillation, and we teach. We have a course that we do, an internal course, which is called Malt Advocates course. Yeah. Okay, and which we set up when I got involved in the malt, sort of moved from the archive and got involved in running the malt whiskey business with Diageo. And not only did I realize that I didn't know a great deal about malt whiskey, but certainly many of the people in the company who were selling it didn't know that much about it. So we set up this course, which was really very technical, and we were so lucky that we managed to open the door on the Diageo technical experts who were so forthcoming in their knowledge. And it's sort of, if you ever talk to people that have done it, they'll tell you it's the gold standard in training and all the rest of it. And I sat through, I don't know how many of those courses. Okay.
Okay.
And now we do just one a year or I'm involved in only one a year, where we bring in writers and bloggers who are interested in knowing more.
Yeah.
And so we sort of show them the world of distilling as Diageo sees it. And, every time I do that, we did one just about a month ago, and I was sitting there, it's like, now I understand that. I don't know how many times I've heard this bit, but
as long as you get it eventually, right?
Yeah.
There's
it's a long journey to enlightenment. It really is. Yeah.
But you know what? There are two ways to think about spirits, right? Or two ways to think about music, even, right? Maybe there's more, but it really comes down to two things. Distilled down to two things. You can feel it, or you can think about it, right? So how does this make you feel? A wonderful whiskey makes you feel beautiful. You don't have to think about why it's good. it's just as good to you.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's the thing is that I understand distillation, we do it, but unless the spirit makes me feel something, what's the point anyway?
Well, we're doing this thing on Sunday night here in Austin, and one of the Scotch whiskies I'm going to talk about is a very famous whiskey from a distillery that's no longer with us called Brora.
Okay.
Northeast coast of Scotland. And this particular bottling, which we bottled it in 2004, it's 30 years old, so it's distilled in the 70s.
Wow.
This particular, Brora has a reputation for a certain flavour style, which you might call sort of farmyardy.
Okay. Interesting. Can you kind of describe what that means to you? Like pastoral, grassy?
Grassy. Well, I'll use my tasting note, and you can edit it. You can edit it out later if you want to. It's like goat shit on damp straw.
No, I get that.
Yeah?
That's what Baijiu tastes like.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Perfect. Makes sense.
Okay.
Got it.
Well, no, it's not like Baijiu. Baijiu is more vegetative.
Well, it depends. A lot of it tastes like goat piss, to be very honest.
So if you've got your mind in that place, it's also quite sweet.
Yeah.
And dairy-ish, cheesy-ish a bit maybe, and stuff like that. So and this particular bottling is just astonishing. It really is incredible. So it's like, well, where does this come from?
Yeah.
How did this flavour? Because we don't golden age,
right?
Golden age.
Yeah.
We don't make whiskey like this anymore. So talking to our technical guys, said, well, where does that come from? So it starts in in Scotland when we mash, we do 3 mashes. Mm-hmm. And you drain the water off each time, 3, and that goes in to be fermented into the wash. But the final water you keep to start off the next cycle of mashes. So you need to keep that water at a certain temperature. If you don't, butyrics are going to be created, and then they will go through into the fermentation process, and that will carry through into distillation, and that gives you farmyardy. Okay, I say we know how that happens because we don't do it anymore. And I said, well, you know what? I think you might have to start doing that again because it's just one of the craziest tastes.
It's a perfect. So, I'm going to go just deep for a second. But Beatles, you're familiar with Beatles, right?
Yeah.
So She's So Heavy. We all know that song. Okay, amazing song. That's
on Abbey Road, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
So I was only thinking because I saw a thing on YouTube of some guys who made a live recording of the whole of Abbey Road.
Oh, jeez.
And it's brilliant. Go and look.
That's amazing.
Go and look for it. It's astonishing. And someone told me about it, and I thought, that sounds strange. And unusually for YouTube, I watched the whole thing.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and it's a bit tear jerking as well because the energy in the room, it's fantastic.
That's incredible. Well, there's
anyway, I just had to reflect.
Yeah,
that is one of the best Beatles records.
Oh, absolutely.
And people don't seem to understand it.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's the best way to go out, and is the way they actually went out. But one of the reasons that I find it's the imperfections that become perfect. So on She's So Heavy, there's a point where John is screaming. So he's like just screaming at the top of his lungs, and you hear the mic peak and distort. In most other records, in most other vocal tracks, no one would ever keep that on the record, right? But it is perfect because he's enraged. He is coming unhinged. And you get that just rawness, and it screws up the tape. It actually distorts the tape. And these are the kinds of things where you're like, well, let's go do that. Well, you can't go do that intentionally. It's got to happen by accident. So you think about this farmyardy note with the fermentation that was just like, you did it, right? It was a time and place, and you can never really, truly replicate it. It's this beautiful imperfections. Now, I know, but being in that room at that particular time, the air is that certain way. Maybe I'm golden aging it, Dr. Nick. Maybe.
Yeah, it's hard. I was in a guitar store for a couple of hours today, looking at very expensive old guitars, and my head was in the golden age of guitars. Actually, pre-CBS Fenders. No, they're just as good today, really. The price tickets on those things are crazy.
It is incredible. Well, it's really lovely chatting with you. I've still got a couple other questions, but God, we talk about music, we talk about whiskey. How long you're still with Diageo? Right?
Yeah.
How long has that been going on now? How long?
So that's 26 years. So that's over a quarter of a century.
You should be proud of yourself for that.
Yeah.
not Diageo changed, but have, like, I know the answer to this. Is it good the way in which people have changed in terms of their interest for Scotch whiskey?
Oh, yeah. Now, I mean, it's one of the sort of things I talk about to colleagues and sometimes external audiences, because I don't think people realize how much, well, whiskey in general, actually, but I'll talk about Scotch particularly, how much the Scotch business has changed, been transformed over the past 10 years. And I have a graph which I show people, which is one of these big line going right up into the sky.
Yeah.
And I show people a graph, and I don't tell them what it is, and I ask them to tell me what it is. So think about Scotch whiskey over the past 10 years. What might that be? Okay. Well, here's one thing. Number of whiskey podcasts. Okay. Number of whiskey bloggers.
Yes.
Number of whiskey festivals. Number of releases of different single malt bottlings. Number of new distilleries being built. New distilleries 10 years ago, people would have thought you were mad.
Right.
Sorry. People would have thought you were...
Well, crazy. How about crazy? We'll use crazy.
We'll go back to crazy. Yeah. Where, you were just in the wrong place if you thought anyone was going to open a new distillery.
Yeah.
And actually, the graph is the price of our whiskey, Port Ellen famous whiskey, which when we started bottling it just over 10 years ago, we were selling it for £100 a bottle, and now we're selling it for something like £2,600 a bottle. And that in itself, I think, captures that transformation of interest, enthusiasm,
demand, all of it.
Yeah. It's wonderful. Sometimes I have to stop and think, because you get used to everything so much these days so quickly.
Yeah.
And I think everyone needs to remind themselves, the bad old days, the good old days. Well, we're in a great place, and of course for bourbon and American whiskey,
my gosh, love it,
on fire.
Yeah.
Absolutely on fire. I was in Kentucky earlier this year. And I spent a lot of time there in the 90s, mid-90s. And, it wasn't a great place.
Yeah.
And the bourbon business was not in great shape at all. And sadly, United Distillers and Diageo, between them, decided to divest themselves of so many of these great brands. But now you look at it, I mean, talk about transformed. It's crazy.
That is a true golden age.
Whiskey... Don't tell me you want to be great again. Whiskey is so great at the moment.
It is.
Everywhere.
It's culturally, and this era of whiskey and spirits in general, whether it's agave, whether it is gin, we have more selection, we have more greatness than we've ever had in spirits.
And the other thing, I'm not a great cocktail person. I have quite limited tastes, and I don't go for some of the more exotic sort of creamy stuff and everything like that. But I had a drink in a bar last night. I had a martini. I got off the plane. I was tired. I just wanted a great drink. And I went into a bar, great bar, very nice bar, and asked the guy, dry martini, very dry, olive. He came back and asked me if I wanted it shaken or stirred, which is great because I wanted it stirred and I hadn't asked him. And he made me a great drink. And I think that's something that's so different. And it's the same in London. Everyone cares a lot more about the drinks they're making or they're serving you, and that's a wonderful thing.
It's shown to be a concept that's worth working with.
Yeah.
It's become lucrative, if you think about it, this industry. Well, so you're here because Austin's great, and your daughter suggested it.
I'm here because Austin's weird.
You are, in fact, like on a concrete slab at a distillery right now. Weird? I don't know.
It's great. I'm loving it, actually.
It's gritty, right?
Yeah.
So Sunday, though, we've got you and Lana from both working. She was working with Dickel, still doing a lot of Dickel stuff with them. You happen to be in town. Apparently, you're going to bring some incredible marks. What was the occasion? You guys just wanted to hang out and share?
So the original thought was just to do a tasting, I think, of Scotch.
Yeah.
And then the idea came, well, let's taste some Scotch and some American whiskies.
Beautiful.
And then it got a bit more aggressive. So someone thought of the phrase the whiskey wrecking crew and the American whiskey versus Scotch sort of shootout.
East side, west side kind of thing, yeah.
So it's got a sort of competitive element about it. But we're going to be tasting some great American whiskies and some truly great Scotch whiskies and letting our audience, I think, decide which they like best. And of course, they might decide they just don't have a preference because they're all
all great.
Yeah.
At some point, it's all good. What are you going to do? Yeah. You're just lucky to be alive at that point. Yeah. I mean, I'll see you on Sunday for certain, but it sounds like just an amazing kind of free-form thing. It's about the love of whiskey, and bringing people together again.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Mike. I did an interview with someone else in the US recently, and I did have to point out that whiskey is a thing of the heart for me. Yeah. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that. And people think about Diageo being a big cruel monster, greedy corporate
too big to fail. Yeah.
But we have as much heart amongst our whiskey makers and the people that sell our whiskey in Diageo as anyone working at the scale as you do here in your small gin distillery, your beautiful small gin distillery.
Thank you.
And everyone has heart for whiskey, and sometimes you see the heart coming out when people just talk, and the love when people talk about it.
Yeah,
it's a great thing. So it's, I'm privileged these 25 years. I'm now paid to talk about Scotch whiskey, and as you're probably beginning to regret, you can see that I could talk about Scotch whiskey at length.
No, this is a lovely thing for me. It's a really
but
privilege.
It's just a privilege to share some of these stories, some of these wonderful whiskies, to think about how they got to taste like they do, to think about how whiskey might taste in 10 years' time as well, which is quite interesting.
I go back to the music. I always do. Find this magical way to go back. Yeah. But you're traveling the world, talking about something you love, performing in a sense. You're presenting, you're sharing. It's about as close to being a musician and on the road and on stages you can get. Whiskey has some rock stardom to it now that it didn't used to have.
Yeah. Yes. No, I'm a bit embarrassed because someone actually described a presentation I did about Lagavulin as being the nearest thing to making Lagavulin a rock star whiskey or something. But I think that was because I was swearing a lot on that one.
Throwing whiskey on people in the front row.
All of that stuff. But it's maybe there's a similarity. I think there's here's the thing, interesting thing. I know so many whiskey people who love music.
Yeah.
Who are either great musicians or great collectors of vinyl and stuff like that, And those are the whiskey people that I tend to love. And, we all get on really well together.
Yeah. Well, it's, having not met you and read a bit about your academic pursuits, we could just sit down here and shoot the shit. It was really easy, man. I really appreciate you taking the time out. It's been just lovely and brilliant chatting with you, and I can't wait to see what marks you guys have on Sunday.
Yeah, well, wait till you taste the brewer, believe me.
I'm going to be thinking about farmlands.
Piece de resistance, as the French would say.
Really, really thank you for stopping by, and we'll talk soon, Dr. Nick.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much.
Well, there we have it. Dr. Nicholas Morgan, Director of Outreach of Whiskey for Diageo, a sophisticated, classy, cultured guy, had an interesting career starting kind of in academia, transitioning into whiskey. It's a really brilliant journey, and just to sit and hang out with him and kind of just feel the breadth of knowledge that he possesses, the breadth of experiences, just to be a fly on the wall in some of those shows that he saw and some of the things he saw go down. It's just really an amazing experience for me. So thank you so much, Lana from Diageo, for hooking me up with Dr. Nick. And Dr. Nick, I hope next month when I'm in London with my lovely wife that we get to share an emergency martini and another dram or two. So thanks everybody for listening to Show to V with Mike G. No matter which of the rare malts you would like to try out of the new Diageo portfolio, or if you're wondering why the hell people are fighting for unborn lives when they won't fight for immigrants themselves, please keep tanking.